What's up, guys? My name is Witty, and I am finally back from this 3-month hiatus that I've been on. I've been really sick, dealing with a whole lot of stuff in real life, but we are better now, we are good to go, and hopefully all is well. Now, we are back on Diablo 4 today, and we're here to talk about the Polearm version of the Whirlwind Dust Devil Barbarian. That is a mouthful, but that is what we're getting into today, so without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right into my scuffed version of this build, and then we will talk about the best variation of it, so to speak, and the fastest compare, contrast, etc, etc, etc. This build uses a polearm in place of the grandfather, and we also use a polearm as our main weapon while using Whirlwind. This does end up beating out the grandfather as far as damage, as far as clear time, as far as speed, every way. It beats the grandfather, even if only marginally, and if you have the grandfather version of this build fully decked out, there's absolutely no reason to switch. It isn't a huge difference, but this is in fact the better version of Whirlwind Dust Devils if you're starting from scratch. Since it's the last 3 weeks or so of Season 4, I'm going to assume you guys have a couple Ubers, and we are of course using the Harlequin Crest, Tyrael's Might, and Ring of Starless Skies. You only need 3 Ubers for this one instead of 4, which is great of course. Remember, mine sucks. I swapped from grandfather. I have like 8 builds and I never fully finish gearing one, so we'll get into the planner in just a second, and if you focus on that, you'll be better off than I am, I promise. Now, let's go ahead and scroll down a bit. Obviously, I don't have max resistances. That is mostly in part to my boots min rolling, and also not having greater affixes anywhere where I could have them, such as resist elements on Tyrael's. Scrolling down a bit, we are aiming for as close to, if not 100% critical strike chance. I'm still missing, 17.5%. It can be obtained a lot of ways. It can be obtained by rolling dexterity instead of life on weapons. It can also be obtained by using emeralds in your armor, which of course we are using here. Ideally, you get greater affixes on crit strike chance in 2 places where I don't have it. And eventually you will end up hitting at least 90%, which is really what we're after here. Now, we always want to have 300% damage while berserking, and this is obviously because of the Blood Rage node. If we have 300, we hit the cap of 30%, and this is multiplicative. However, anything above 300% damage while berserking, it becomes essentially additive, and for that reason, you really shouldn't go above 300. We do operate with a 0.6 or 0.7 ratio here, as far as our critical strike damage to vulnerable, and you can find this out by dividing your vulnerable damage into your critical strike damage. So here you can see I'm right around 0.5 because vulnerable damage is half of my critical strike damage. You want to be closer to 0.6 when you are under 2000 critical strike damage. When you are over 2000 critical strike damage, you actually want to be closer to 0.7. So where I'm at right now, I should be around 1350 to 1450% vulnerable damage. Now, this is pretty hard to obtain on a Barbarian, but it is doable. I only have 150% movement speed. You want more than this? I mean, in a perfect world, I would have had a greater affix on movement speed here. You could even roll movement speed here instead of having cut to the bone where I do. And you could even replace critical strike damage here with more movement speed. This is a speed farming build at the end of the day, so if you're trying to go as fast as possible and you want to cut time off, don't do what I have done, do what's in the planner instead. Now, without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into a Pit 101, and then we are going to hop into the planner and break things down just a little bit. I promise I won't be too boring with that. I'm not terribly stressed about min-maxing the speed into this build, but we will use an Elixir of Momentum, as always. And we will do our best, but I expect to finish around 1:30, maybe a little bit more or less. Alright, so we want to open the fight up by using one of our shouts, and from there, we simply just hit drive-bys all day. That's all we have to do. We want to keep our berserking up, and this is done with Warcry, and we just want to hit drive-bys with tornadoes. That's the gameplay. Of course, I don't have game sounds right now, so this is extremely weird. There's been a bug going on for a little while with that. Not sure what that's about, but that's okay. We get some interesting maps here. Should have probably went up and grabbed that elite pack really quick, but it's okay. Now, sometimes I won't even bother grabbing shrines because they can just slow you down, but obviously we will grab that one really quickly. And it looks like this run is going to finish at maybe 1 minute and 30 seconds. So the reason we take Rupture on this build is as follows. You will be able to see it. Once we have bled the boss out for the most part, we simply Rupture it all out and save ourselves that 5 to 10 seconds for the bleed to eventually come down. And that is what a Pit 101 looks like. Now, like I said, you will be 30 seconds, if not more, faster than this, hopefully, especially if you follow the planner. It's kind of dumb to compare yourself to where I'm at because I have not focused on this build as much. But that is what it looks like, and let's go ahead and jump into the planner. Alright guys, so I'm going to keep this nice and short and sweet. We're going to go over 2 or 3 different variations of this build, so to speak. Mainly the one that I just showed you, as well as a much more optimized version of the Chinese speed farming build to kind of show you what both sides can look like. And we're going to start with the build that you just watched me complete a 101 pit in, and that is this one here. This is the Mace plus the Polearm version. Obviously, we're using a Polearm. And just to kind of touch base on all of these things really quickly, we are, of course, going to use the Ubers. In a perfect world, you want the greater affixes as well as the Masterworks on cooldown for the Shaco, on maximum resist to all elements for the Tyrael's Might. Damage reduction is blue here. It has 1 in it, and that is simply because it is the second best option. You can really do anything with your Masterworking here. The Ring of Starless Skies is not supposed to be lucky hit chance. I'm not sure why that even is. It is actually supposed to be critical strike chance. Not sure what happened there. Then we will go to the gloves, where you will want critical strike chance as a priority, vulnerable damage being second, and strength being third. Pants, we want to do strength, life, and armor. You can substitute life here if you find that you have an excess amount of it, and you can roll anything. I mean, I would probably recommend getting dexterity here. You can just hop on a rogue and roll that, and that's a little extra crit chance. So, or boots, I use the max evade charges personally because I like having multiple of them. It's a personal preference thing here. We want movement speed and ranks to Warcry to be the priorities here. Ranks to Warcry is multiplicative damage increase. Movement speed is obviously to make the speed farming build more of a speed farmer. Our weapons are pretty self-explanatory. Generally speaking, you want strength, life, and vulnerable damage on all of them. The life can, of course, be replaced with percent damage. It can also be replaced with dexterity, with the exception of one of them having Fury on Kill if you find yourself needing the resources, essentially. If you're doing Helltide or lower level content, you will tend to run out of resources more. So having Fury on Kill on something is really, really useful. For our amulet, in a perfect world, you actually want to run critical strike chance with heavy-handed and either movement speed, cut to the bone, or cooldown reduction. Now, for the actual speed farming, obviously you want to have movement speed instead of cooldown reduction. I personally have cut to the bone there, but I am probably going to end up rolling it into movement speed as I continue to develop this build a little bit. You can also replace the imposing presence here with more movement speed if you wanted to. As far as the ring goes, the one that is not an uber unique, obviously, we're going to be using critical strike chance, vulnerable damage, and lucky hit vulnerable. Skill tree is pretty self-explanatory. The first 2 points are just to get to the next tier, where we will take Furious Whirlwind, since we are using a slashing weapon for Whirlwind in this version, being the Polearm. This does benefit us, even though it's not a huge amount. We end up taking Pressure Point, which touches on the Lucky Hit Vulnerable again. This gives us an extra 10% chance on top of our ring. Then we move on down here and we pick up our first shout, which is Rallying Cry. We take the tactical option here for resource generation. You can opt to take the Max Life and Fortify version as well if you find yourself to be a little squishy. We obviously want to max out Imposing Presence on every Barbarian build, and we are going to put 2 points in Martial Vigor for damage reduction against elites. You can steal a point somewhere else, for example in Raid Leader, and cap this out so you have 12% damage reduction against elites, but I don't find it to be necessary, and I'd rather have the extra healing potion button, pretty much. So, as we move on down, Challenging Shout is simply for damage reduction. It also acts as a way of crowd control, because taunting is a crowd control, and we add on Enhanced for the maximum bonus life. We are going to take all 5 points in Warcry, and we go with Power Warcry, because 99% of the time we are casting this around enough mobs that we will get the additional 10% multiplicative boost. You can opt to run Mighty Warcry, again, if you find yourself feeling squishy. We take Booming Voice to increase the duration of our 3 shouts. We take Raid Leader to basically make them all function as a health potion. We take Swiftness for more movement speed. We come down here to grab Aggressive Resistance for the DR, as well as the ability to use Prolific Fury. If you don't need the Fury generation, you can actually take these 2 points away and just straight up have 8% more DR. Moving on down, we take Pit Fighter and Slaying Strike, just more damage here. We use Rupture on our skill bar as a means to one-shot the boss, as you guys saw. I did have a pretty poor example of that in the video where I did the pit, but that is what it is for. Normally, you will bleed the entire boss's health bar in the first second or so, and you'll be able to rip it out almost instantly. That boss kill actually took a couple extra seconds because it was the Frost Collar. But we end up taking Hamstring, both because it slows enemies, and we want to get to Cut to the Bone, which is one of our biggest multiplicative increases. This, alongside Heavy-Handed, which is right down here, are 5% per point, and they are multiplicative, so we want as much of those as possible. We grab Thick Skin, mostly to unlock Counter-Offensive, which gives us multiplicative damage when we are fortified, which we are 90% of the time. And then we take Wrath of the Berserker. And we do this for the movement speed, the Fury generation, and of course, the extra damage is always good. Gushing Wounds is what we are going to run for 90% of barb builds, particularly the ones that are bleeding. That one's pretty self-explanatory. As far as the Paragon boards go, I'm not going to go over all of this because this could add another 5 to 10 minutes to the video, and it is long enough if I'm being honest. So I will just quickly run over the fact that we are using Exploit, Might, Disembowel, Ire, Wrath, and Executioner. The link will be in the description to this planner anyways, so you are more than welcome to come look at how they are oriented and how things are laid out, and make changes accordingly. And that is essentially how I run my version of the Polearm Whirlwind Barbarian. Now, there is a faster version of this build, a better version, most would say, that I do plan on making a video on very soon. As always, I thank you guys for hanging out and giving me a little bit of your time. I look forward to seeing you guys in the Sanctuary Discord as well as in game, and hopefully this was able to help you guys out. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.